And now we take leaders' questions under Standing Order 38. Deputy MacDonald.
First, a warm word of welcome to Inver College from Carrickmacross in County Monaghan, the alma mater of Deputy McCarthy. So you have a lot to answer for. You're very welcome. Minister, government is all over the place as to what happens with the €430,000 salary of NAMA's CEO Brendan McDonagh when the agency is wound up at the end of this year. One arm of government doesn't know what the other is doing, and it's been contradiction after contradiction. When your plan was to appoint Mr McDonagh as your new housing czar, the Taoiseach told the Dáil repeatedly that he would retain his $430,000 salary in the role, and Micheál Martin was adamant that this would be the case and that this wouldn't cost the taxpayer any additional money because he would be seconded and the salary is already being paid from the public purse. But then we had the Minister for Finance, Paschal Donoghue, directly contradict the Taoiseach. He told us that Mr McDonagh won't retain that eye-watering salary when he returns to his role within the NTMA. He said that only a specific number of NAMA executives will retain their terms when the transfer of personnel takes place. And then we had your good self in the middle of this fiasco, and this is where it gets very Fianna Fáil-y. As Minister for Finance, you of course drafted the legislation making it clear that all NAMA executives will go to the resolution unit in the NTMA and that therefore all of them will retain their pay and conditions. This must include Mr McDonagh and his €430,000 pay packet. You'll also recall, Minister, that the officials who came to the Oireachtas Finance Committee in September were very, very clear that Mr McDonagh is retaining his salary. So the labyrinth of contradiction prompts people to ask what the hell is going on here. People catch the stink of something rotten. And of course, there's not been a peep from government on the fact that Mr McDonagh, your once preferred candidate for housing czar, is renting out a house here in Dublin for €10,000 a month, or rather €10,000 a week, in the middle of a housing crisis. So you desperately try to save face and scramble for cover because at the heart of this controversy is the instinct of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to keep political insiders on side, to preserve the way things work and to feather the nests of the golden circle. Your big problem, Minister, is that nobody trusts Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to tell the truth. You were caught fibbing about housing delivery figures during the election. You were in the middle of that. Caught out with the false election promise to provide an extra $1 billion on water infrastructure. And of course, you spent the last few months moving heaven and earth to protect your grubby deal with Michael Lowry. So when you do business by misleading, you can't really blame people for not believing a single word that comes from the government's mouth. Tá an rialtas seo trina chéile maidir leis an doras dul €430,000 de ceannasaí NAMA, gach ráiteas nua tagann sé salach ar an ráiteas riva, agus an rialtas go léir géirí dul I bholach. So, Minister, you drafted the legislation that will allow Mr McDonagh to keep his jaw-dropping salary. You have it down, in fact, as priority legislation. So I'm going to ask straight questions and hopefully you might give a straight answer. Who, Minister, is telling the truth about Mr McDonagh's €430,000 salary? Is it the Taoiseach or is it the Minister for Finance? And can we have some honesty from your government?
Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you very much, Ken Corley. I want to welcome all the students as well from Inver College who are here, and hopefully they get inspired by politics and what you're seeing today, and robust exchanges, which are always important in the political system. And I appreciate what Deputy MacDonald has raised, and I will provide clarity for you. First of all, the legislation that you reference was a general scheme on the conclusion of the IBRC Special Liquidation and Dissolution of NAMA Bill 2024, which was published in July last year. And you referenced pre-legislative scrutiny, which was ongoing at the Oireachtas Committee between representatives of that committee and and officials from the Department of Finance. And it contained standard statutory provisions modelled on other similar legislation to ensure that when operations of one state entity are transferred to another, the employment rights of staff are preserved. This was included in the general scheme in case it was required, which is specified in this, to apply to the transfer of a small number of staff from NAMA to a resolution unit in the NTMA to be established to manage any residual activity following the dissolution of NAMA. No decision has been made, as Minister Donoghue said yesterday, with regard to who these individuals might be, and discussions are ongoing with the NTMA, but it's clear that the resolution unit will be much smaller in scale than NAMA was, and as such it is not expected that the unit will require the transfer of the CEO role as it is currently constituted. Where staff who are not going to be in the resolution unit and who are not already made redundant by NAMA prior to the dissolution date are concerned, it is a matter for the NTMA as their particular employer. The general scheme sets out clearly that this provision is not complete, that discussions, and I quote, are ongoing with the NTMA, and it may be the case that no provision is needed in this bill to facilitate staff transfers. And Government has not yet published final legislation on this matter. And just to your question regarding the Housing Activation Office, this is a really important office when it comes to addressing the barriers, the constraints that exist at local level, for example. Yes, the nominated individual that you've referenced is not proceeding with that role, and as such the Government will, or Minister Brown will come back to Government on who that might be and what the appropriate expertise will involve in the context of the establishment of that office. But it will be an important office to address some of the constraints and the barriers at local level. And I think we should all have that cross-party approach to actually addressing the constraints that do impede supply of housing at a local level. And this is a proactive response from the Minister for Housing to actually address the barriers and difficulties within some local authorities, to try and synchronise and coordinate the delivery of local infrastructure. And that particular Strategic Housing Office will work and coordinate with the infrastructure division that I've established in my own department, so that we really accelerate and step up the ability to deliver infrastructure and housing supply across our economy. The purpose of having an individual leading that is that we have someone with the appropriate level of expertise and leadership to really drive change and accelerate delivery in this particular area. The appointment of a head of office with an in-depth understanding will be critical to having the impact that the office needs to have. And in the interim, staff will be deployed from within the Department of Housing to step up the particular office. It will also involve seconding particular individuals from across the commercial state sector to accelerate delivery in the provision of infrastructure. So I've clarified the matter relating to the legislation. It was a general scheme. The legislation has yet to be published on that matter, and it may not require that provision as the NTMA works through the relative conditions with respect to people that exist in NAMA. And we are stepping up the Housing Activation Office, and it will make a difference in the provision of housing supply, and we should all support that.
Well, Minister, in the spirit of being helpful to you, can I suggest that what needs to step up is the performance of the Minister for Housing? And indeed the collective performance of Government. All of that is just verbiage that you've offered up on that unit. The Minister for Housing drives housing delivery. That's their job description. That's why they're on a big salary. Your scheme, your legislation is very, very clear that all NAMA employees and executives transferring back to the NTMA will work in the resolution unit. Therefore, all of them will hold their terms and conditions. That's what it says. So either you are going to remove that provision from the legislation. Is that the case? Please tell me if that is the case. Or other than that, we can only presume that Mr McDonagh will return to the NTMA and he will hold his salary of €430,000. Now, you've been caught out here, Minister, and you're continuing to duck and dive today. I want clarity from you.
Thank you, Deputy.
He will return to the NTMA. What salary will he be on? Will it in fact remain at €430,000, an obscene salary in anybody's mind?
completely reject what you've said there. And you asked me a question relating to the legislation, and I gave you an answer which reflects the factual position in the general scheme that was presented. And in the draft general scheme, it states very clearly that discussions are ongoing with the NTMA, and it may be the case that no provision is needed in this bill to facilitate staff transfers. The Minister for Finance, Paschal Donoghue, yesterday set out very clearly that the resolution unit would not require a CEO, that it's going to be a much smaller unit managing the remaining assets that exist within the NTMA and in that particular unit. And that's why the NTMA, as their employer for staff who are not already made redundant after the dissolution date, they'll be engaging with the respective staff relating to their future contractual position within the NTMA. And that's a contractual matter, as you will respect, between the employer and the respective employee. And I don't think it's appropriate that you're raising a particular contractual matter for a particular employee in the context of their in the context of an ongoing engagement. That would be respect to any employee in the NTMA, and that particular provision may not be required as they conclude
Labour
the
Leader
resolute
Deputy Ivana Bacik.
Minister, the so-called housing SAR debacle has left more questions than answers, and not just questions about salary either. The Minister for Housing has been very quiet in responding to these questions. We need to hear from him here in the Dáil. He must come to us to explain how he proposes his new Housing Activation Office will work. He cannot leave explanations to the Minister of State for Nature and Biodiversity, as he did on the radio last Friday. Over recent weeks, we have heard plenty of noise from government about unblocking blockages, tackling shortfalls, maverick approaches, boots on the ground, but no detail. Minister, will there be legislative underpinning for this new office? Will it do more than check the Minister's homework? And crucially, how much will it cost? And I think whatever the salary, what everyone is struggling to understand is what will the Housing SAR do that the Housing Minister cannot do themselves? Because the Minister is currently failing on housing. Minister, let's take some examples. On infrastructure, we learned yesterday about the lack of funding for Uisce at a time when we're hearing so much from developers, from house builders, about delays due to infrastructure. We heard yesterday the extra $1 billion for Uisce in the budget did not actually represent additional funding. What my colleague Deputy Jed Nash has called a three-card trick pre-election, a bit like the promise of 40,000 homes last year. And infrastructure is slowing delivery. Lack of infrastructure is slowing delivery. We're hearing it in Mallow, where 469 houses are being delayed due to infrastructure problems. We're hearing it in Dublin too. And we're hearing other issues as well. Take Pierce House, just a few hundred metres from here, Minister, a large flat complex in the process of being regenerated. But just over recent weeks, we hear from the Department of Housing there's been a hold on regeneration plans, partly because that building is listed. Residents are devastated, Minister. They're facing appalling conditions, sewage overflowing, unsafe stairwells, damp houses. It's not just Pierce House either. Regeneration is badly needed at Oliver Bond Flats, at Mercer House and across developments across the country. And it's ironic that Pierce House is listed because it's one of the Herbert Simms developments built in the 1930s. Minister, between 1932 and 1948, Simms built 17,000 homes across our capital city, a programme of building at scale precipitated by a famous report which was commissioned in response to worsening conditions in the tenements and which concluded that the state had to deliver homes at scale because the private sector was incapable of doing so. Minister, the words of that report are very reminiscent of the words in your own Housing Commission's report, seeking a radical reset of housing policy, seeking that the state would play an integral role in providing counter-cyclical support to ensure that home building could proceed at scale. What we're not hearing from your government is any recognition of the need for that urgent and radical reset in housing.
Time is up,
Minister, people are being left without a home. They don't want a SAR. They want a home.
Deputy.
What will your Housing Minister do to reassure us that he is going to deliver homes?
To respond.
Well, just say, I think everyone across the House acknowledges that the state has to play a central role in the future of infrastructure delivery in our economy and also in the provision of housing across our economy. And that's why that's been acknowledged in the context of what we are going to do and how we strategically invest over €20 billion from the Apple Escrow Fund, from the Infrastructure, Climate and Nature Fund, in terms of the prioritising housing, energy, water and transport infrastructure, all as critical growth-enabling areas that we need to invest in to protect and progress Ireland's future. Again, you're critical of the Housing Activation Office and what Minister Brown has sought to do, and in the interim, staff are being deployed from the Department of Housing into that office, with seconding respective experts from utilities to try and address some of the blockages that exist at a local level. I'm also stepping up an infrastructure division in the Department of Public Expenditure to respond back to the absolute need to accelerate infrastructure delivery across our economy. And in parallel with that, we're developing a programme of reform so that we try and address and narrow a lot of the timelines which are too long and are too elongated in terms of the delivery of housing and infrastructure across our state. And it's all about trying to synchronise delivery between water, energy, utility providers and the respective delivery agents that need to deliver more across our economy. When it comes to your question on Irish Water, as I set out on Budget Day, a €1 billion equity investment was provided for in Budget 2025 following the sale of the bank shares, and this was in addition to the voted Exchequer allocation provided as part of the funding mix. And you reference the correspondence from the Chair of Irish Water, and an excellent Chair, who's also, I know, the Chair of of Dublin Port, should I say. And he obviously reflected the need for clarity and concerns that was responded to at the time by the Minister for Housing. And in further correspondence from the Chair, he acknowledged the appreciation of the Uisce Éireann Executive and Board for the commitment of the Department, the Minister at the time, and indeed the Government, and that the support and the responsiveness of the Department had been genuinely helpful, that he appreciated the time and attention given to clarifying the funding available for Uisce Éireann for 2025 and the use allocation of the additional €1 billion capital investment. So a few days after the correspondence that you referenced, the Minister clarified the matter, and that was acknowledged by the Chair of Irish Water at the time. But I do acknowledge the need, particularly for water infrastructure, for additionality to accelerate the delivery of additional wastewater treatment and to also provide for additional connections for new homes. And that's why we've been very clear that water investment will be central to the allocation that will be received in the National Development Plan in July, and why it is a strategic area of priority for the Government. So Irish Water has the multi-annual funding to really accelerate delivery where there is a significant deficit across the
Deputy Bacik.
Well, Minister, it's very difficult to take seriously your government's commitments on infrastructure or on housing delivery. On infrastructure, what's clear from the correspondence, what's clear from the revelations about Uisce Éireann is that they simply have not been provided with the necessary additional resourcing to enable them to step up, to provide the vital connections that are necessary to ensure building at scale. On delivery of homes, again, that 40,000 figure that we now know is 10,000 off. And across the country, we're seeing communities who are left bereft, awaiting housing developments that were long promised. Poolbeg, the Irish glass bottle site. We were promised thousands of new homes there. I met last week with the local housing action group there, Minister, and they're still despairing of hearing a firm agreement on the numbers of social and affordable homes to be provided on that crucial site. So we're simply not seeing the delivery of homes, we're not seeing the delivery of infrastructure, and we still haven't heard from your Minister as to exactly what the Housing Activation Office is going to bring that will be additional and that will provide for the necessary capacity to build at the scale that Herbert Sims built at all those decades ago.
Minister.
Look, the Housing Activation Office will be there to better coordinate delivery in terms of the provision and supply of homes at a local level. And the Minister will set out further details around that. He's working through the details, he's stepping up the office itself, and he's also will provide leadership when it comes to the actual person that may be appointed in time around that particular office, and that is to coordinate delivery and the provision of the increased supply of homes across our economy. We acknowledge that there is an infrastructure deficit. We acknowledge that there's a need for additionality across water, energy, transport and housing, and that's why we're taking a strategic approach to having an early review of the National Development Plan and prioritising key areas in those 4 particular areas that I've referenced, all with the central focus of increasing the supply of homes across our economy. We've historic increases in the provision of direct support for social and affordable housing, when a significant portion of the homes delivered last year were through the direct contribution of the state. And you will see through the National Development Plan a serious uplift in that in the context of those 4 areas.
Minister.
So we support infrastructure
We now
delivery
move to
to
the
increase the supply
Independent
of
and
homes.
Parties Technical Group Deputy Ruth Coppinger.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, would you agree your government's record on housing over 100 days has been an unmitigated disaster? 15,376 people in emergency accommodation, housing completions down by 6.7%, social and affordable targets down by 18%, figures that you, by the way, knew about before the election and haven't yet explained why you stayed quiet about them. And then to top it all off, search parties are having to be sent out for the Housing Minister because nobody has a clue who he is. Before he even took up his post, he announced he needed a housing czar. And what this is bringing back is the golden circle hangover and headaches of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael from past eras. Now, Brendan McDonagh, the favoured candidate, was to be hired on a salary of 430,000. He's to go back to his other state job on the same one unless you take action. And the ditch revealed that Mr McDonagh had bought a house in Cabra under the name of Brendan McDonagh in September 2014, but had used 2 aliases on the same property. And if someone has a love of the Irish language, they normally use those aliases and names in other forums, not just in relation to property, by the way. So PB McDonagh registered the property. Padraig McDonagh sought 5 planning permissions on the property. And I'm just wondering what due diligence the government did about the candidate. Why would somebody use 2 different aliases, Minister? Do you know? And how would a house in Cabra command a rental of €10,226 a week? It's not the Riviera. So there's so many questions that need to be investigated about this. Are you aware of any other properties Brendan McDonagh may have registered in another name? Is this a case of somebody in the property sector who's gaming the system because they're in the know? And will the government investigate this now that Mr McDonagh is moving back to another state job? Now, Minister, why do we need a so-called housing czar on a salary 10 times the average wage of a teacher or nurse who can't afford a house? It's crystal clear what needs to be done. There are state lands and there's money in the state coffers. In your constituency, Fingal Council has a huge land bank at Scribbletown, Elm Green, Dunsink, of 247 acres. They've asked for 200 million from the government. All you need to do as Minister for Public Expenditure is to write a cheque. You don't need a housing czar to do that for you. That site could provide 7,000 houses, according to the council at a council meeting in October last that your councillors were present at. It's a strategic land bank for the county of Dublin and for Dublin West, your constituency, where so many are suffering. Will you fund that land bank, and do we need a czar for that?
Just before you respond, I just want to reiterate that I understand there are issues, but it is a long-standing ruling of the Chair that members should not comment or criticise or make charges against a person outside of the House or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him identifiable, as he is defenceless against accusations made under privilege of the House. Just letting you know that, Deputy, and we move to Minister Chambers.
Thanks very much, Ceann Comhairle. And as you've said there, I'm not going to respond to the specific query that you've raised relating to the article in the ditch. It's a matter for the individual to respond. I don't have the factual position on that case, and I don't think it would be appropriate to make any assertions or allegations connected to it. And I think we have to respect the ruling of the House, and he's not, the named individual you referenced is not here to defend himself. The new Housing Activation Office that you're continuing to criticise is being established by Minister Brown to ensure we bring that radical step to the delivery of homes across our economy. You've referenced the example of Fingal County Council, who I think can be a central local authority for the increased provision of social and affordable homes. But to actually deliver at scale, you need to bring coordination across the respective utilities in water, with the ESB, with the local authority themselves, to actually have that enabling infrastructure to deliver homes at scale. And that's what Minister Brown is seeking to do, to have a structure within the Department of Housing which actually brings that coordination to strategic sites that can deliver homes at scale. And that's what he's doing in the context of the Strategic Housing Activation Office that he's establishing. To your question relating to funding, we've seen record levels of funding by this government, over €6 billion of capital investment planned for 2025, but we know we have to do more, not only specifically to voted allocation for housing itself, but also to the respective utilities that have been raised here today. And that's why giving Irish Water, giving the respective needs in terms of the grid infrastructure, enabling those infrastructural agencies will be central to increase the supply of homes. So that's why in the review of the National Development Plan, we've identified the strategic priorities which will receive much greater additionality as part of the multi-annual programme which we'll agree. And housing, energy, water and transport are all central to that. We won't have a National Development Plan like we've had maybe in previous iterations where there was a general dispersal across government. This is about prioritising clear areas to really focus on the supply of homes so that we support local authorities who have strategic land banks that will enable delivery of additional homes, like Fingal County Council that you've referenced. There are other local authorities, probably 10 or 11, which have the ability to deliver homes at scale, and that's why the Strategic Housing Activation Office will play a clear role working with the respective utility companies to try and accelerate the delivery of more homes, more social and affordable homes, complemented by additionality that will bring in the context of the NDP review. And that's what this government is seeking to do, what Minister Brown is seeking to do through the establishment of the Strategic Housing Activation Office, all to deliver more homes, more social and affordable homes for families across the country.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Coppinger.
Well, with regard to the issues raised about the favoured candidate for the post, the question was, will you investigate these issues, even if you don't want to answer them right now? With regard to the other issues, so you do not need a housing czar to contact Fingal County Council, have a meeting, discuss with them their needs, and then organise the payment of whatever needs to be done. You don't need a housing czar. This is not like it hasn't been done before. Previous Fianna Fáil governments actually did this in harder times, in the 1960s, the 1970s and the 1980s. It's not rocket science. There's no need. What is the role of the housing minister if somebody has to be hired in and brought in to be called a czar? In relation to that land bank in Dublin West, which is a strategic land bank for the whole county, there should have been meetings between the housing minister and Fingal about that and getting that started straight away. Have those meetings happened?
Minister Chambers.
And if they haven't happened, will you organise that it will happen?
Thank you, Deputy Minister Chambers.
Well, of course, the Minister for Housing will be taking responsibility for the wider delivery of social affordable homes across our economy. But say there is an engagement to our meeting, it's important to have a structure in the Department of Housing to ensure there's follow-through, to ensure there's no delays, to ensure that the respective utilities are actually following through on the plans which government will seek to fund. And identifying strategic land banks, like you've referenced in Fingal County Council and other local authorities, we need to try and force coordination by the respective utility companies and the local authorities to increase the provision of social and affordable homes. You engage with people who, if you engage with anyone who's developing housing or who's trying to increase the provision and supply of housing across our economy, whether it's an approved housing body or indeed in the private sector, they'll tell you that there is coordination issues that need to be managed very carefully and actively, and having a structure in government to do that and to force that will, I think, help yield greater housing supply, which people should welcome.
Thank you,
and I think it would be much better if you provide constructive input into actually supporting that office with the Minister for Housing. Would make a big difference.
Thank you. We now move to the Independent Technical Group Deputy Peadar Toibin.
Minister, I've been told by people working within the health service that there are senior healthcare professionals at the moment, some of them including consultants, who are creating their own private companies, diverting patients from public waiting lists to their newly created private companies. It has been alleged in one case that a consultant who created this private firm to read scans used the hospital public waiting lists to then funnel work through rostering into his own private company. An incredible situation, a major conflict of interest for anybody in a public role to be doing this in relation to their own businesses. You must admit, Minister, it must not be allowed that anybody on the public payroll should be in a position where they're creating a private company and funneling public work to their own private company. Now, I put a PQ to the Minister for Health a couple of weeks ago to see if this practice was widespread within the sector. And the response I got is actually quite shocking. An internal audit report, which was carried out by the Office of the Chief Internal Auditor, was written less than a year ago, and its job was to ascertain if private companies were used to provide additional services such as this, and it found that there was a major breakdown in terms of compliance and in relation to value for money as well. UHL, for example, was found not to have conducted an open procurement process, with 14.2 million euros paid to these types of providers just in 1 year, 2023. And management confirmed that there were no dedicated procurement functions within the group in relation to this. In UHL, 2 private providers were owned by, or part-owned by 2 separate UHL employees. A third company was owned by a HSE employee with another hospital. Now, this corroborates the allegations that have been made to me in relation to this practice happening. That report states that the government were getting a handle on it, but it's currently the actual case where we're hearing of this happening in real time at the moment. Now, hospitals have work coming at them at a fierce rate at the moment. I know of one hospital that has 960 biopsies at the moment. That's a backlog of 960. Within that backlog, there are people with cancers. There are delayed diagnosis, delayed treatments, and more negative outcomes as a result of this. It's clear that there's not enough beds within the system. It's clear that investment is not getting to the front line, that it's getting caught up in administration. The population of the state grew by 100,000 people last year. And your pay and numbers policy is an effective recruitment embargo on the health service. Now, the INMO are having their conference today. Will you send a message to their conference today to say to nurses and doctors that you have their back? Will you send a message to say that you will end the practice of public staff creating private companies and funneling patients from public lists into their private companies in future?
Thank you. Minister Chambers.
Thanks very much, Count Corla. And the matters you've raised are very serious and need to be properly and thoroughly followed through by the HSE. And there obviously are references there to conflicts of interest and value for money concerns, which are extremely concerning. And under initiatives to reduce waiting lists, the HSE can outsource to private hospitals under the Surgical Services Framework and the Private Provider Framework. The HSE look internally within and across hospital sites to deliver insourcing pathways, and as part of the waiting list action plan, there is a focus on deploying additional weekend, evening and out-of-hours activity to reduce overall waiting lists. The HSE CEO, I understand, at the request of the Minister for Health, has initiated a detailed survey of all insourcing activity within the HSE, which will be assigned by Finance, Internal Audit, HR and Access integration functions. The HSE CEO has also issued an instruction that all insourcing where existing staff are hired, engaged or paid by a separate entity to work on initiatives in their own place or type of work must now be paused. Only insourcing where the HSE directly engages its own staff through payroll can continue until this survey is completed. The ultimate aim of this work is to move beyond the dependency which you've referenced on insourcing or outsourcing in favour of planned, stabilising rostering of all staff. There was an internal audit which you referenced on insourcing in UHL, which found that consultants that were carrying out insourcing in UHL. The audit found that consultants set up private companies and referred patients to their own companies. Tender processes were not appropriately followed. The CEO of the HSE has instigated a review of insourcing, as I've said, across the HSE, not just because of the above audit, but also due to broader concerns about how it is operating and value for money considerations. In relation to the instruction to pause work where existing staff are hired or engaged by a separate entity to work on initiatives in their own place, they're examining all arrangements and contractual agreements in an effort to pause this work as quickly as possible. So I have to say, having been made aware of this, it is serious, and if appropriate procedures haven't been followed, there has to be full follow-through from the HSE, and all dimensions of the respective financial frameworks should be followed by anyone working within the HSE relating to insourcing and indeed outsourcing, and I've tried to provide some clarity on the matter today.
Thank you, Minister Deputy Toibin.
I welcome the pausing of this insourcing, but the question has to be asked, why is this happening? Now, I've spoken to a hospital in the Midlands just today with staff within that hospital, and they've told me that they had a red escalation just over this bank holiday weekend. They said this is unheard of in the middle of summer. It happened in December and January, that they are being told to get patients out of the hospital, free up operations and other elective engagements so that they can orientate staff towards the people in those EDs. There's 461 people on trolleys today. That's 461 people that are crowded into hospitals overnight, lights on, not getting to sleep, etc. We have 50,000 hospital appointments cancelled so far this year, 800,000 hospital appointments cancelled just in the last 4 years, and today there are 800 vacancies for consultants. So we have a major crisis happening in terms of resources in this hospital, and that's why this is happening. So it's not just good enough to pause it. What we need is to get rid of the pay in numbers embargo on staff so we can actually resource the treatment that needs to be delivered to patients.
Minister Chambers to respond.
The main areas of focus for the new Minister for Health has been the absolute need to address work time during the evenings, but also over the weekend. And the Minister has been proactive in managing that over the last number of weeks, in particular, to ensure that we have a greater presence of senior consultants and others across the hospital system to try and accelerate discharge and provide senior oversight within the clinical environment over the weekend period. And I think you're seeing the positive outworking of that in that ongoing management and work between the Minister for Health and the HSE. Related to the pay and numbers strategy, there's a significant increase in the health budget that was agreed last July between Minister Donoghue and Minister Donnelly last summer, that we gave a multi-annual 2-year certainty to the HSE to manage their overall pay and numbers in the context of a 2-year framework. And that was welcomed by the HSE at the time, and indeed the hospitals existing within it, particularly the tertiary hospitals and others, so that they could accelerate recruitment over that window of time. And I think that's had a benefit to the HSE in terms of managing increased clinical workloads.
Now, and just before we move to other members' questions, I'd like to welcome Ballyashenny